Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fitt Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today, I'm joined by Jason Baptiste, CEO of Studio. Studio is a smart hub for your home gym. In this episode, we discuss Studio's transition from a fitness app to connected hardware, how digital fitness companies can build community online, business model innovation in the fitness industry, and whether or not gyms will go the way of movie theaters and arcades. Let's get into it. Hi, Jason. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Excited to chat today. And I think just kicking things off, can you tell us about what you're working on at Studio?
Yeah. So, high level, Studio is the smart hub for your home gym. It is the one immersive screen that connects to all the devices in your home gym. So think about your treadmill, your rower, your indoor spinning bike, boxing, yoga, strength, you name it. It is the one screen that connects it all together. It delivers the world's best instructors, and it's connected with an uplifting community, and it's at an incredible price. It's available for $9.99, which is quite a discount from some of the other stuff out there.
Yeah, I think you have a really interesting perspective. I want to get into more about the hardware and just how you're approaching the connected fitness space. But can you tell us about your background a little bit, how Studio got started, making a transition from the content and audio base to hardware, and how you made that leap?
Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I've always been at the intersection of media and software. Before this, ran a company called OnSwipe, which was the world's largest mobile publishing platform. It was acquired in 2014. We've always viewed what we do at Studio in many ways as a content and media business, right? It's just a question of how do you deliver that content and media to consumers in the most engaging way possible that's, going to keep them for the long haul. And, it's interesting, from the outside, it looks like, well, it was an app for, 2 years and now it's hardware, but that's always been the plan. And we took a much different approach than anybody else out there in the hardware market. If you think about other folks, they'll raise a lot of money. And the first time anybody in the public ever sees their content is after multiple years when they finally launch the hardware. And that doesn't seem to make sense because, we did a survey of, folks interested in buying connected fitness products. And the number one thing that they look at when buying is the content. So you would sit and think like you would want to perfect the content beforehand. And that's what we did. We said, let's get an app out there. Let's stream thousands of classes, have tens of millions of classes streamed, across hundreds of thousands of folks over a few year period. Let's get the feedback on that. So when we finally do launch our hardware product, we've kind of buttoned down the most important thing possible to folks.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so thinking about it now, is the plan or the hope initially here as the hardware rolls out? Look, you just turn around and sell this to your existing customer base. Or do you think it's a matter of, finding an entirely different audience or maybe kind of something in the middle?
Yeah, it's something in the middle, right? First off, the reason we have always said we want to put hardware together with our content and software is it's really where the magic happens. It allows you to get something in a person's home. It allows people to stay committed. And that's why, app companies see churn somewhere around the Spotify levels of that 4 to 6%. But when you look at, connected devices, they're around that less than 1%. So that's why we chose to do it. But, in terms of, what does the customer look like for the hardware? What is the role of our app going forward? Listen, our belief is that a good portion of those folks, are going to say, hey, I want the most immersive experience possible. I want the device to connect with all my fitness equipment. I'm going to go all in. And we expect and know a lot of folks are going to do that. But at the same time, some of those folks might stick with our app, and that's fine. The app to us is really, a mix of lead generation and a little bit of showrooming, right? It's like, hey, I want to fall in love with the Studio instructors in the Studio universe. How can I do that before committing to, a $1,000 piece of hardware and a $39 a month subscription? Get started with our app business. And, that's never really going to be a profit center for us, but really about lead generation and getting people into the Studio universe.
There's so much happening now when you think about the connected equipment space. Almost every day it feels like there's a funding announcement, a product, a feature announcement, and it's just really becoming increasingly competitive. My perspective, it's a huge market. We need a lot more people working out. It's certainly not competing for a small or existing customer base. But when you think about maybe the competition and a different word, just like the landscape, where are you fitting in? How are you standing out? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm absolutely right. So we think connected fitness is the most important piece of consumer electronics, since the smartphone, right? A lot of folks think of it as old school manufacturing when you think of fitness equipment. No, it's really, connected fitness. It's a piece of consumer electronics. So we think it's, super important. And the way we think about the market is we think holistically, right? So our goal isn't to be the Peloton of X or the Peloton of Y, because we think back to the consumer. People build home gyms. They don't say, I'm going to have just a cycling room or just a rowing room or just a treadmill room. They usually buy, 3 to 4 pieces of equipment, whether that's dumbbells and a treadmill and a boxing bag and a bike. It varies. We want to bring everything together and serve as the hub, as opposed to serving as, just another standalone product that is, trying to be the next Peloton of X, right? So we think about the consumer behavior of building home gyms, especially as that's rapidly changing in, with COVID. And the next part is, like you said, it's a giant market. And what I think a lot of folks don't realize is that 8 million people buy a treadmill or spin bike. And by people, I mean consumers every year in North America and parts of Europe. And most of those devices need to be connected. People talk about Peloton this, mirror that. Only 5% of the market is connected. The other 95% needs to be connected. So we're also helping transition all those folks who bought a treadmill or spin bike a few years ago become connected.
Right. I think it's something it's an interesting point that maybe gets overlooked in the conversation is that, the evolution when you start to think about the Pelotons and the connected fitness pieces, like it's also business model innovation. So it's like you're going from paying for this gym membership or paying for a studio to the idea that now everything is going to be tethered to a particular piece of, vertically integrated equipment with the content and everything. And then now what we're starting to see is like, hey, and this is where studio is kind of fitting, is like, hey, let's just open this up to fitness more broadly. We'll make the content in the screen. You do whatever you want. If you have a different piece of equipment or you already have something or maybe, a brand that you already like, let's use that and really start to innovate on that model even more.
Absolutely right. And it's a completely different consumer than ours, but Zwift has done a fantastic job of that, right? And now with the recent funding, they're going to start making some hardware, but they've really kind of been this open platform for hardware. And that's where we see ourselves, right? There's a famous quote, I think it's from Jim Barksdale, who was the CEO of Netscape. And, the quote was something like, there's only 2 ways I know how to make money: bundling and unbundling. You basically had Peloton bundle the screen and the bike together, 8 years ago. We're kind of going and saying, we're going to unbundle it. We're going to, put the screen and the hardware in one place and the content and subscription. That's us. And let everybody else make the bike, the treadmill, the rower, who knows what's next. And frankly, there's a lot of folks who do a great job of that. You look at Nautilus and, Schwinn and Bowflex and Horizon and, a whole slew of others. They do a great job. And frankly, I don't think we could do as good of a job making a bike. So let them do what they do well, and we'll continue to do what we do well.
So then looking on that side of it, you start to think about what is that piece? What are all the elements that go into it? So much of what's talked about is you have the instructor or the talent, you have the content itself, the class, the formats, and then how do you build community? And so maybe that's a 2-part question or 3-part. Just how are we approaching each of those elements, and how do you really excel at that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? If you talk to a lot of folks, and by folks, I mean, it can be other entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, many of them will be like, I don't see how content is defensible. But then if you look at the movie industry, it's pretty clear why Marvel has had, what is it, 2 billion-dollar movies. Star Wars is an enduring franchise over 40 years. There's so much value in content and IP that But frankly, it's one of the most defensible things in connected fitness. And that's always been, our thesis. And, the way we do it, I'll tell you, the first way we do it is with Lisa Nyren. She's our chief content officer. She's Peloton's original head instructor and really pioneered a lot of the way that connected fitness content is thought about. And she joined us, almost 3 years ago to lead that up because we both share this vision of fitness as entertainment. And what I mean by that is, you can get fitness as instruction. Get a personal trainer and they'll walk you through very bland. And trust me, that works for some folks. And that's great. Like you said, the more people working out, the better. But for most folks, it's tough to stick with fitness. It's tough to be with it. And that's where we think of fitness as entertainment. And that's the instructor. That is their personality. That is them sending a message. And even though, the classes are pre-recorded or, sometimes live, you're thousands of miles away. It feels like you're right in the room with them. So when you create fitness as entertainment, the instructor and the member create a bond. And we've got a good 50, 100-page guide on how we do this. It's kind of some of our trade secrets and secret sauce. You start to build community. I can't tell you the number of members that write in thank yous every day, text message with some of our instructors, have met up in person with each other. It's really fascinating how the lead is so often buried, the content and community. That's really what makes this all special.
When, I don't think it's only fitness that this maybe applies to, because I've had this same conversation with, in the fitness space, but more broadly kind of athletics with Mark Gainey from Strava. Then I talked to the CEO of Tracksmith when we start talking about, are you building community? Are you tapping into community? Like, what does that actually mean when you start to think about in a boutique fitness class, the community is kind of evident. Like people are there with you. You kind of give them a high five afterwards. This being a huge part of like CrossFit and SoulCycle and Barry's Boot Camp. What does that community aspect and building a relationship look like when it is in the digital space? And maybe you don't interface with those people in person and don't know them the same way.
I mean, it's fascinating. The two of us have never met in person, right? So much of the world is building off of being virtual. And, even though you lose the fidelity of in person, you get kind of the volume and kind of frequency of, kind of digital. And I think that brings something special. But taking it back, if I were to, put one word to why community is so important in fitness, and that could be any company. That could be us. That could be SoulCycle. That could be Peloton. That could be athletics. It's the word comfort. When you have community, people start to find comfort. Hey, I'm not quite sure about this class. You can do it. You can do it, right? It's that comfort of, I can actually do that. Or, hey, I just had a really bad day and I need an escape. The instructor comforts you. So when you have a community, you start to find comfort. And that's so important. And it's, that's the same reason community is important in religion. We find comfort out of religion. It's why it's so important in, other areas. And I don't know if I want to call it a study or a paper, but there's something fascinating that came out of Harvard Divinity School, quite a few years back called How We Gather. And, the top things in there are things like CrossFit and SoulCycle, because people find belonging at a high level. But when you really go down to it, community is about comfort.
And I think another thing, you kind of touched on it, just building on that, like, to the fact that we've never met in person, it opens up this idea that you can really then find the people that maybe are like-minded or that you can learn from, relate to, that aren't in your, area code or the city you live in or the boutique fitness studio that you go to. It kind of opens this door to an entirely different group of people that you gravitate towards that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to meet. So I think it's super interesting as that idea of community evolves in like the digital space.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating is so many folks, in the early days of studio, and I'm sure in the early days of, a few of your other guests, is that how will something digital ever compare to, the community in a, indoor spinning class or indoor boot camp class. And part of me is like, have you ever been to these classes? You're in the dark looking forward. You're certainly not talking to a person because the music is blasting. I know you're building community with an instructor one-on-one, but afterwards, most people just shower and, go home versus digitally, you're able to focus on this after class experience. That's where the magic happens. That's where people connect, is before class, after class. It's it's in between the reps and sets that you really build community.
Yeah, kind of changing gears a little bit and thinking about the market maybe holistically. And I think everybody has kind of their different take on it. And I don't ask the question to kind of be a hot take, more so just like how you're thinking about it. Is there a saturation point with screens and connected equipment, that the idea that, hey, we have to have this device in the home?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask most folks, working out with the screen and an instructor, inside of your home is just so much better than anything else. Listen, certain advanced athletes, they might not want that. But then again, Zwift is a runaway success on the other part of consumer behavior. So my belief is like, listen, there's always a saturation point in the market. We are so far away from that saturation point. The way that we look at the market is, I've mentioned the stat of 8 million treadmills and spin bikes sold every year to consumers in North America and parts of Europe. Okay, that's giant, and only 5% of those or so are connected, right? It's really Peloton and Mir and a few others selling screens and being connected. So you've got 95% of the existing market that, just needs to be connected. You've then also got, tens of millions of other devices that they may have purchased in previous years that don't even have a screen. I think that's one part. But what's even more interesting is, we think about what's happening with COVID. It's kind of, what happened to arcades in the late 80s and early 90s is once people realized they could get the experience of an arcade in their home with the Sega Genesis or Nintendo, they kind of stopped going to arcades. You throw in a global pandemic where it's not safe, I think the stat is somewhere around like 80 million gym memberships in the US. It might be 60 or 80, but it's not unreasonable to think that, 10 to 20% of those folks are not going to go back to a gym ever. That's, an additional 6, 8, 12 million folks. That's giant to expand the market. So it can get saturated, but I think we're so far away from saturation.
Sure. And I think you kind of led that right into the transition maybe that I had in my mind. You take this trend towards digital, the emergence of a new business model, new technology, throw in a global pandemic. Now you can't go to the gym. So all of this, as everybody's kind of framing it, it didn't create this trend. It accelerated this trend, whether you think about it as, 1 or 5 or 10 years, however far into the future. Yep. What does the outlook for gym and studios look like?
Yeah, I mean, one is I feel for all those folks. There are hundreds of thousands of trainers in the US, tons of independent small business owners, and they're hit hard, right? So, optimistically, I want to say that they're all going to be okay. I grew up going to gyms. I've been, working out since I was 12 years old, right? So I want them to succeed and thrive. But if I look at the realistic scenario of where we are, I think it's going to be tough. You've got the global pandemic. In New York City, boutique fitness still hasn't opened. Gyms are at reduced capacity, requiring a mask. And a parallel we have is the movie theater industry, where the movie theaters are open, except for, New York and California. But, a Christopher Nolan movie that normally does $1 billion, I think it did $5 million last weekend, has only done 30 million in the US. So my guess is if you're concerned about going to a movie theater, you're definitely concerned about going to a gym. So I think it's going to be tough on the gym side. And then on the boutique fitness studio side, it's all about selling the class out. And even if they open, it's going to be a while until you can have more than 25, 50% capacity. Take all of that and throw on top of it, a company like Studio saying, great, for $39 a month and, a small upfront investment, which, by the way, you can finance and have for way cheaper than a boutique fitness class or a gym membership in the comfort of your own home. It's going to be tough. I'm not going to be as brazen to say that gyms go away altogether, but it kind of feels like the late 80s where arcades started to slowly fade away. And, we had Sega Genesis, we had Nintendo, and, kids growing up, they're asking for Xboxes and PlayStations, not quarters for an arcade.
Yeah. And there's so many unforeseen, unknown second and third order effects of that. You talk about, the arcade as an example. Well, some could argue that then that led to a booming gaming industry that could never have been imagined when you think about, I have to go to this physical location to do this thing at a, designated time and what have you. Then you have the other piece, which I'm curious to think about. One thing that we've kind of thought through, having had the experience, not only working out in gyms, but owning gyms and working in the fitness space, is like, what happens to the instructors and personal trainers? There have been so many that have become celebrities and influencers by working at boutiques like SoulCycle, but have also become kind of staples in their community. Like, is there an opportunity, or, whether it's with studio or anybody else, an interesting point I think about is like, how do we take those studio instructors now and like insert them into these digital pipes and connected fitness that are being built? Is there an opportunity for that? And maybe how are you thinking about that in the future?
Yeah, I think, there's ways we're thinking about it as a company, where we'll kind of play a role in that. And then there's, just ways we generally think about the industry. And the first thing I'll tell you is the story of studio has never been for studio to win, company X has to lose, or vice versa for, company X to win, studio has to lose. So, listen, I think a lot of those folks will make a smart transition to digital. Companies like Talent Hack, they've done a fantastic job of, helping educate instructors how do you go from a 4-wall room to something digital. So I think, that's going to continue to happen. They're going to host their own Zoom and live stream classes. I think that's one. Two is, is there going to be a digital platform that is completely open that anybody can teach a boutique fitness class? I don't know. And I kind of speak my own book, right? And everybody does that. And the issue is, it's all about the content, and people have such high expectations for content. I don't know if you'll be able to have, a great, let's say, SoulCycle instructor teaching out of their basement be more preferable to a large number of folks than, let's say, a studio class or Peloton or somebody else. So I'm curious to see how that plays out, and I could obviously be wrong. I think the third part of the bucket, it's the hundreds of thousands of personal trainers that, aren't looking to teach boutique fitness. They're looking for one-to-one interaction and instruction. And, they've kind of had to figure out how to teach, instruct digitally. What's the opportunity there? And I think that's something, we spent a lot of time thinking about. We're not quite ready to say, hey, here's what we think the answer is. But whenever you have a fragmented market with a, large labor force that can all of a sudden become digital instead of physical, and you can pair it with a nice audience, I think there's a real opportunity there. Once again, whether that's studio or other folks, I think there's something to be had there.
Yeah, and I'd be excited to hear. Maybe we can jam a little bit more offline about that. I have some ideas as well that we're kind of thinking about when it comes to the personal training space.
Yep.
But, earlier in the conversation, we kind of hit on that every day, maybe every couple hours, a new funding or product release, what have you, comes out. One that's kind of taken everybody by storm has been Apple announcing the Fitness Plus subscription. Just wanted to get your thoughts on, what do you think about a $2 trillion company coming into the fitness space and how that impacts things?
Number one, I think it's fantastic, right? It continues to validate that this is closer to consumer electronics and software than it is manufacturing and bare metal. So I think it's great, number one. Number two, I'll kind of just, give people a quick, refresher on history. We had Apple Music come out a few years back. Then we had TV Plus come out. Last that I checked, Spotify and Netflix are still number one in their category and, just monster companies. So, it's very easy to say, well, what if Google and Apple come in? Does that doom everybody? I don't think it does, right? I think there's a lot of room to go around, and I think they'll have a compelling offering, but it's not going to be the number one offering. But in terms of how we think about it at Studio, it's great for the consumer, but ultimately it's not really competitive to us as it's different consumers. It's, a mobile app on your phone that is $9.99. And it really misses the magic and the best experience when you put that content and software together with great hardware. So listen, I think there will definitely be consumers that just want a mobile app, and that's great that Apple Fitness can serve them. But ultimately, the best experience and what we think is going to be, the biggest category in the space is going to be when you put hardware and great content together. And that's, clearly where Studio's focus. So that's, that's our take on it without having, seen the app, played with it, or, even had any consumers able to gauge reaction. That's just our, off the cuff feeling on it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think that puts it in perspective that for a company like Apple, it's like, hey, this is a check box for us. If we can sell a little something more to a small portion of our massive audience, like that's great for us. We don't have to be the be all end all for this category. Whereas fitness first companies are like, hey, we want to create the best possible thing. And it's going to continue to motivate companies like Studio or whoever else is in the category to really stand out and differentiate themselves. So like the consumer wins ultimately.
Yeah, it's one of those, people, the amount of articles of Peloton's dead. Oh my God. It's, it's kind of crazy. It's, that's why I went with the history lesson of like, we all said, is Netflix going to die? Is Spotify going to die? Every like couple of years we go through a new thing with Apple or Google. And it's like, none of the companies that are number one usually don't die, but if anything, they continue to thrive at number one. And that's, that's good.
Yeah. And I think, so that kind of brings us to looking at, I know kind of product release coming up, the hardware piece for Studio, but can you just give us maybe and even entice listeners a little bit with what does the rest of the year look like? What does 2021 look like from a roadmap standpoint?
Well, man, if you're asking me about the rest of 2020, in terms of the world, it's been an interesting year. If I could predict that, I'd be a multi-billionaire by now with everything that's happened in 2020. But in terms of, Studio, we're, our hardware product, it's going up for sale, right around when, folks will be listening to this podcast. It'll be shipping to consumers, before the holiday season and in mass production. So we're super excited about that. I can tell you for the rest of 2020, it's really just getting as many of them produced as we can as possible because there's just so much demand for it right now. So that's, that's the goal for 2020. In terms of 2021 and a little bit beyond, there's a few vectors we think upon. One is, what are the new ways to utilize the device? And that can be extra sensors. That can be other, hardware devices that we connect with. That can be other content verticals. But it can also be, what are other ways to hit your fitness goals that, might, be different than what you see today. And I know that's, a little bit vague, but that's intentional. Boutique fitness is not the only way to work out. We think it's one of the best ways and maybe the best, but if this is the hub for your home gym, we think there's going to be some other really interesting things that we can do. So I think that's first. And kind of the second thing is, the data that we have, and you can throw in the buzzwords like artificial intelligence, machine learning. Sure. That's fine. But it's really, we've got a lot of data. We collect your heart rate data. We collect your speed. We collect your cadence if you're cycling, your strokes if you're rowing, your punches if you're punching. There's a lot we can do with that data to, help you be guided and learn over time to become kind of the athlete and the person you want to be. A lot of folks focus on AI inside of the class. That's not really we don't think that's our strong suit. We think it's really how can you use the data to kind of, connect the dots throughout all of your classes and progress further. Cause that's where we have just the unique data set. If you look at Peloton, they've got cycling and maybe some treadmill. If you look at, the rowing companies, they just have rowing. We're going to be the first, and only platform that holistically is collecting data across every vertical along with your heart rate and other biometric data. We think we're just uniquely positioned to, connect the dots between your workouts to become the best, athlete possible.
So no shortage of opportunity and kind of exciting things coming down the road. And if folks are interested, and I hope that they are, in keeping up with everything you have going on, kind of what's the best way to follow along, maybe get in touch, everything else?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to trystudio.com, TRYSTUDIO.com. That's our URL. You can find us on Instagram as Sweat with Studio. And feel free to reach out. We've got live chat there. We've got a very active community on Facebook as well. We believe that customer care and community scale. So don't just go to the URL, reach out to us and engage.
Awesome. Well, Jason, listen, it was a great conversation. Excited to share it out, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fitt Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.